This Sunday among wildflowers at the Buttercup Farm Audubon Sanctuary in the Hudson Valley of New York State. I'm Jane Pauley. Please join us when our trumpet sounds again next Sunday morning.
We're going to go forward here now. I've done seen part of this. Listen to more of it than I've seen. We're going to go all the way to the tail end because that was the part that I felt like the people needed to hear pertaining to my viewers. So we're going to go all the way up to, hang on. I think that was
For our class.
I think that was our part of our friend we was going to document here. I think so. Let me go back.
Stop crime in real time.
Hang on.
We'll be right back with Gary Cohn, Vice Chairman of IBM and former White House Economic Advisor. Stay with us.
Gary Holmes.
Welcome back to Face the Nation. We're joined now by the Vice Chairman of IBM, Gary Cohn, who also served as former President Trump's top economic advisor in the White House. Good to have you back here. It's expected to be a very big week with the Federal Reserve expected to cut interest rates because inflation does appear to be moderating. How big of a cut do you expect? And what will this mean for prices, particularly for housing, which is such a big part of inflation?
So, Margaret, let me take one quick step back. The Federal Reserve has a dual mandate. They have a dual mandate of stable prices, which means they fight inflation, and they have a second mandate, which is full employment. For the last 4 years, they've been fighting the stable prices mandate. They've had to bring inflation down. We got inflation as high as 9.1%. We've seen the Fed raise interest rates from 0 to 5+%. That has effectively dropped inflation back to 2.5%. We're now to the point where the other side of the dual mandate is kicking in. We're now starting to see unemployment tick up. We're now over 4% unemployment. So the Fed is going to start cutting interest rates. We all believe about 20.
Now I'm going to weigh in. First of all, I was the one that spoke up probably about 2 years ago, as the Feds, may have been a year ago, kept raising the interest rate, towards it being counterproductive in what that they was doing pertaining to helping people versus hurting them. Also, what I have found just recently within the past 30 days, that rather going to your mega retailer or your mega whatever that basically keeps up with the fluctuation prices pertaining to the market value, you're actually better off if you can. I'm going to use this as an illustration. I've been having a little bit of problems with my my water pump out here towards the regulator being bad. Well, I thought about jumping in my car and going to Lowe's and getting one. But while I was out in the Paris area, I wound up going to a hardware store and went in and got one, purchased it for $28. And whenever I first bought it, I thought, well, that's a little bit higher than what I gave last time, but that's okay. Everything's went up. But then whenever I do go to Lowe's and I do start looking at the same type of regulator, that regulator is $37, $38. So a lot of times it takes a little bit of time for your mama, papa retailers to actually catch up to the market prices, and unless they're on top of their game in understanding that the same product that they have on their shelf is going to cost this amount of money to replace it and start charging that amount of money, you actually may be better off in getting some of your parts, regardless whether it be home parts, car parts, or whatever, and going to somebody that isn't part of the main food chain. Because the main food chain, they're going to fluctuate one way or the other based upon the market prices. It's kind of like gasoline. Whenever you notice gasoline, that'll go down real low with your major mega gasoline products, but your mama papa gasoline business would take a little bit more time before they get their prices back down there where it's supposed to be. And according to what they tell you, is that they have to pump out a certain amount of money out of their tanks before they can actually lower their prices to justify the differences in the prices. Same way, whenever the prices go up, prices can go up, let's say, at your mega people, it go up, let's say, 20 cents a gallon. And it, like I said, it can fluctuate 3 cents going down, 3 cents going up. But let's say they're 20 cents higher than what your little mama businesses are. Well, once more, it takes a while before they pump enough fuel in ordering fuel. That way they'll have to raise the prices up equal to what the mega gas companies are. So at that rate, you can actually save money by going to your mama papa gas stations versus going to the mega. But then whenever the prices are dropping, you're actually better off going to the mega because they're going to drop quicker than your mama papa. So basically, you got to learn how to play both angles. You got to learn how to play, call it burning the candle at both ends, or call it playing one against the other. You got to learn how to do this as an adult if you're going to get the best bang for your buck. It's kind of like with me being so close over here to the Kentucky state line, I have a benefit because they don't have as high as tax as what we do, because they have a sales tax over there that everybody has to pay, like on their automobiles and stuff like that, or some kind of tax, to where basically all we have to pay over here is a wheel tax. But our taxes over here is like 9.7%. Because I'm close enough to the Kentucky state line, it's actually beneficial for me to travel over the state line, especially if I'm going to buy a whole heap of groceries pertaining to food, because their food taxes over there, in some cases, is almost zero, and about the highest thing that you're going to get charged for, I think, is about 6.8 is about the highest rate that you're going to pay on some of your food. And it's just beneficial toward being able to learn how to play both sides against the middle if you're going to be a good consumer and if you're looking for the best bang for your buck. They don't explain all this to you whenever they're talking about these numbers on TV. They just tell you what the mega prices are, and that's the standard that they're going to go by. Well, you as an individual, if you're going to get the best bang for your buck, sometimes you got to fish around. You got to hunt. You got to shop around. You got to be a bargain shopper. You got to figure out, hey, this works this way, this works that way. Which is going to be the best for me to work it into the middle to make sure that I get the best bang for the buck. And unless people like me express that to my viewers and the other people out there, then they're going to be left in the dark. And they're not going to know about these fluctuating prices that are going to be more predominant on one end going one way as they are the other way, vice versa, which will be basically counterproductive if you don't stay on top of the game. Now, you would think that, wow, living in America, you wouldn't have to do that. But the way that the prices has become so imbalanced since COVID, you'll be surprised what people are doing right now today in exchange of what they wasn't doing before COVID. One of the things that I don't do that I ought to be doing, I ought to be looking for that extra benefit of shopping, let's say at Shell or Exxon, because some of those retailers will give like 10%, 10 cents off of a gallon, or some of your other marketing strategies pertaining to coupons and stuff like that. That's what I ought to be doing. But because I got so much other stuff that I'm involved in, I don't really have time to sit down and micromanage my sales that way, or my purchases that way, in which I ought to. Let's go back to the regular program here pertaining to not just price gouging. I was more or less talking about price gouging and et cetera and everything in between. But let's go back to what they're talking about here as far as inflation.
This week, and maybe about 100 basis points or 1% between now and the end of the year. What the Federal Reserve has control over is they have control over the very short-term overnight interest rate. They don't control longer dated maturities or longer dated yields. When people take out a mortgage, they're borrowing money sometimes for up to 30 years. Those rates are not affected by what the Federal Reserve does. Unfortunately, I think that those rates have already priced in what the Federal Reserve is going to do. So I do not see a major impact to the mortgage market or credit card financing or anything else by the Fed starting to drop rates this week.
That's interesting because we saw that the Federal Reserve of New York cited the highest credit card delinquency rate in over a decade.
Listen to
around
this.
9.1% of credit card balances turned delinquent over the past year. That suggests consumers are under pressure.
Yeah, consumers are under enormous pressure. So remember, we all came out of COVID with the consumers in the best balance sheets we had seen in our lifetimes. And we put enormous amount of stimulus into consumers' balance sheets. When the economy reopened, consumers did what we really know how to do well in the United States, is not only spend what they have in their account, they use all the capacity on their credit cards. People went out and spent, they took vacations, we saw that, they spent a lot of money on their houses, and they went out and got their credit cards fully charged up. They assumed that the economy was going to stay strong, they assumed that job growth was going to stay steady, they assumed that they would continue to be...
And who was it that broke that cycle? Who was it that broke that cycle? Think about it. It was the devil's people over in Saudi Arabia pertaining to OPEC that got all the other oil manufacturers, the big tycoons, basically to raise their prices in and during, shortly after COVID, or in the latter end of COVID, that basically destabilized economies all over the world. Who do we have to blame for that? The oil industry. But do you hear anybody getting on TV and downgrading them for their acts? Do you hear anybody getting on TV routinely and downgrading the oil manufacturers pertaining to not being wise and trying to bleed off of oil versus go to other types of energies? No, you don't. Why is that? Because it's the cash cow. It's the main cash cow that drives inflation, that drives the economy. We have seen them again and again stair step, or I have. I'm 63. I remember the first time that they done it was in the late 60s. Then they done it again in the early 70s. Then they done it in the mid 70s. Then they done it in the late 70s to the early 80s. And every time they do this, there's a shift, and in the process of the shift, there's a lot of people that wasn't expecting for something like that to occur, and because of it, they got to go belly up. Their businesses can't stand it. It actually offsets things so badly that it brings despair into a lot of businesses. I remember personally in the late 70s, early 80s, so many of your little mama papa farming businesses in this particular area and all over the country basically went belly up because of that very reason. They went from the price of gas in your gas tank being like 60 cents a gallon, and they raised it up to like $1.40 a gallon. And whenever you do that, you destabilize economies all over the world. Well, they done it this time in the process of COVID, which we was already being hit in directions that we wouldn't expected, and now, give or take about a year and a half, 2 years after COVID, so many couples out here that thought that they had a good savings account has had to dibble dabble around in their savings account, regardless whether it's 401k or whatever, and because of it, it's drained them. And now you got people that has resorted to this high hiking scam pertaining to the credit cards, which, as far as I'm concerned, should be outlawed the way that they do it. But then again, if you get to looking at all the banking industry, that's basically how everybody's surviving. Unless you do or have been given a silver spoon in your mouth, to the degree that even the farmers, they basically work for the financial institutions. Your bigger businesses that's got to borrow money to start in business. Unless they've been in business for a long period of time and they've watched their P's and Q's, they're still basically working for the financial industry. It's the banking industry, the financial industry, that are the ones sitting back on easy street making all this money while everybody else is struggling. Now, we have seen this again and again and again. This time, it's more obvious that it's happening, of the rich even getting richer, while the poor stays poor, and the working class no longer has an opportunity of pulling out of their indebtedness, and now they become poor too as well. Even though they're working their fingers to the bone, some of them working as much as 50, 60 hours a week, and at the end of the week, they still don't have nothing to show for. The brunt of the tax rate has fallen upon that work class, while the powerful and the rich gets all these exemptions. Now, if you can't see where that is 100% evil, then something is wrong with you, because it is. It's not only unfair, but it's wicked, because you're basically ruining and destroying people's lives as they're fluctuating these prices one way or the other. It's awful. It's really awful in how that the mega, the one percenters, play with the rest of them. And I guess it basically breaks down to the ecosystem of the financial economy, that you got the big sharks that rely on the smaller fish, while at the same time you got the whales that rely on the sharks. It's a stepping stone all the way down to the poorest of the poor, to the richest of the rich. And in the process of that, you got so many more lesser opportunities today in the power pack people sharing the wealth than you ever have, because of greed. Now, before COVID hit, China was averaging 2 millionaires a day, is how well that they was doing. 2 millionaires a day. Over in America, we're lucky to see 1 millionaire a day before COVID. Today, now, with things being like they are, I even would go as far to say that we'd be lucky to see 1 millionaire a week. While China over there is still making money, their economy has sunk pertaining to what they're doing and how that they're doing it. Now, you'll listen to this individual talking right here, and you'll hear where he talks about these mega superpowers like China that basically offset the differences between what we're involved in versus what they're not doing that they should be doing pertaining to the environmental regulations. That in and of itself has put us basically in behind the 8 ball, because now we're trying to live by a certain set of standards by obeying all these EPA rules, while they could care less. Please listen.
to be able to maintain that lifestyle. We're starting to see softness in the economy, softness in the job market. We're seeing it's harder and harder to get a job. And so we're starting to see it in delinquencies in credit cards. That's exactly where we would start to see the softness in the economy. And people are going to continue to have trouble getting a job that pays more than the last job. We just got done with a cycle, and we see this in economic data. We just got done with a cycle where a lot of people were quitting their job. People only quit their job when they believe they can get a job at a higher price point.
Well, this is going to be the economy the next president inherits. You just heard J.D. Vance, the senator, say here that Donald Trump wants to end all taxes on overtime, no income tax, no payroll tax, wants to end the tax on tips and Social Security. That's going to add somewhere between 4 and 6 trillion to the deficit over the next 10 years. Does this math add up to you?
So, Margaret, look, I think every elected politician would like to say no one has to pay taxes on anything. And I think every American citizen would like not to pay
Sure,
taxes.
why not?
I mean, why not? That would be a perfect utopian world where we didn't have to pay taxes. I don't think there's a reality in that. Remember, at the end of the day, the government has a budgetary process. It's a very intricate budgetary process where we take in revenue. The biggest revenue creator we have in the government is taxes, taxation on individuals, taxation on corporations. They take in that revenue and then they spend it. They spend it for the goods and services that we as citizens expect them to provide for us. Today, the biggest single expense that we have in the federal government at $3 billion a day is interest on the debt. The second biggest expense we have is our military. Our military costs us $2 billion a day.
$3 billion for compounded interest and $2 billion on our military forces. Billion, as in boy, not million, but billion.
Day. Then you start working your way down into all the social services and products that every citizen of this country wants. If we're not paying taxes into the system, how do we pay for the interest on debt? How do we defend our country? How do we give out the social services that citizens of this country expect the federal government to be delivering to them?
And that's why I asked the senator whether fiscally conservative Republicans would ever vote for what the Trump ticket is proposing here. And the response was that the government would take in money from tariffs. And Senator Vance said that's not just on foreign-made goods, but goods made by companies who produce overseas. That seems to open up punishments for American companies too. What is he signaling here? What do you think this means?
I am not 100% what he means, but let's take a step back and look at tariffs. Because I think we all talk about tariffs, and I think we need to understand tariffs. First of all, I think tariffs is an important instrument for any president to have. It's a very influential instrument that they have when they're dealing with any foreign government. The way tariffs are used effectively, and I support this, is when a country is producing a product substantially below where we can produce it in this country because they have a competitive advantage. So in China, they do not pay for capital. Most of the companies are government or state-owned entities, so therefore their cost of capital is zero. They do not pay living wages to their employees, so therefore their cost of labor is substantially lower than us. They don't have environmental controls, so they can pollute all they want. So their ability to produce a product is substantially different than that in the United States. Right. China produces an electric vehicle, let's call it at $20,000 a car. We produce pretty decent electric vehicles. Ford and GM produce them in the $30,000 a car range. It seems completely reasonable for me if the U.S. government wants to tariff, and they should tariff, the Chinese electric vehicle up to a price equal to, and I would say even higher than the U.S. vehicle. Because
the Biden administration is doing that.
We want to protect those jobs in America. Mm-hmm. We should not allow them to use their unfair advantage to disadvantage American workers.
Now, what he just got through saying, I agree with. But this is the $64,000 question. How come we have been running on autopilot for the past 25 or 30 years and nobody was paying attention to these things? I'm going to tell you why. First of all, they thought that we was invincible and that America couldn't go belly up. Second of all, they wasn't smart enough, like Donald Trump was, in identifying these factors. And third of all, we have been pulled into this pulled into this global market to where, like he just got you talking about, these other countries don't have to abide by these EPA rules and regulations like America tries to do towards basically trying to save the planet. So in actuality, who's actually doing more environmental damage right now to the planet is countries like China and other mega countries out there that are doing these things, that are pumping all kinds of carbons and pollutions up into the air and throwing it into the water, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That if it's not caught up with them yet, it soon will, pertaining to destabilizing the forces of nature.
Side. We import many products that we do not produce in this country.
Right.
Those products are in high demand, and we need them. A lot of them are pharmaceuticals, many other products that we expect to have on our shelves when we go in the store.
But many of those products are things like flat screen TVs, or cosmetic cheap jewelry, or cheap clothing in the soft lines that we get in the bigger retail stores. We expect these things to be there now. Why? Because all the retailers basically pulled away from the labor here in America and started going to other parts of the world and finding cheaper products. Who do we have to blame for that? Think about this for a second. Who do we have to blame for that? The good old American internet. The computer. To where after World War II, in the late 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and even a great deal of the 80s, America was pumping it out, man. We was number one in just about everything that you could think of. But it caught up with us as the computer come on board, because then we started playing on a different set of rules as far as on a global worldwide market that opened up all these different opportunities for all these different retailers to say, why do I want to get this TV over here from RCA that's being built up here in Pennsylvania somewhere that I'm going to have to pay $300 for, and by the time they ship it over here and by the time I put it on the shelf, I'm going to have to sell that same TV for about $425 whenever I can get a shipload of it coming from China or wherever. And basically, the same TV I can put on the shelf for as much as $250 cheaper. So what everybody done, they started pulling all their resources from other parts of the country, from other parts of the world, that basically stifled the American labor force. And that's the reason why today, I'm just going to use an example less than probably 30 miles either way a direction where I live right here. That's the reason why that you can go into some towns and you can see as many as 2, 3, or used to be factories. May not be nothing but a concrete slab, may not be a concrete slab now, but used to have employed maybe 100, 150, 200, maybe 300 people. Some of those employers actually had maybe 2 shifts versus only 1, maybe even 3, depending upon what kind of product that they was making. To where now, as Donald Trump talks about, you fly over them and they look like tombstones. That this was a building here that used to employ this amount of money that was making this particular product. You go on over here and this particular tombstone, it used to be this building that used to employ this amount of people. What done that? What done that? The good old American internet. The computer that once more put everybody on a different playing field, and we could not compete. This is the reason why I continue to say that basically from Bill Clinton's era, from where we're at right now, we got the cart in front of the horse. For the past 30 plus years, ever since the Reagans left office, we spent all this money on all this military force and didn't get nothing back for it. In the meantime, we had people that was working in our own military that was taking advantage of the American people, such as Dick Cheney, the American people are going to pay Bush to go blow up a bridge, and then we're going to turn around and pay Dick Cheney X amount of dollars to build it back. Just like the Cheneys that made all the money that they made off of the damage that happened in 2005 pertaining to the Katrina damage. We can now analyze these things. Proof is in the pudding and understanding what has occurred. Well, in the meantime, we've been suffering. We're not only suffering in no longer seeing the building down the road here that used to employ 200 or 300 people, or maybe 400 or 500 people. We're suffering towards not only it being empty, but now we're suffering in the tax revenue that ordinarily would be funded, let's say, to road projects or to infrastructure projects or to other things that now we're having to take away from. We have basically cut off our own noses to spite our faces over here in America because of either greed or insensible acts of our business sector that basically could care less about the American people, that basically sold us downstream. In the meantime, they was more concerned about their own benefit. I mean, even Harley Davidson, whenever Donald Trump come on board, was actually debating on whether or not they was going to go to another country and building the same parts, but using a whole lot less labor in building that part. That way their motorcycles would stay competitive with everybody else's motorcycles out there. And I don't know what Donald Trump done to convince them of staying here, but we have seen this happen again and again and again. I mean, even Maytag, RCA, all these other people basically left us hanging high and dry and went to other parts of the world and started building the same product, changed their name from RCA to maybe some other kind of name. But now they're shipping those products over to us because they're using labor 3 times less or maybe 4 times less than what we could ever think about doing. So yes, we as a society over here in America got the cart in front of the horse whenever it comes to competing on a global level. Whenever we was competing on the level that we wanted to compete on, we was doing real well during the smokestack industry days. We was number one in almost everything. But as soon as the computer come on board, that changed the dynamics. Now, people could go online and find out I can get this same TV, have it shipped here, and put it on the shelf for $250 less than what I can buy the same TV that they're making up in Pennsylvania. So we cut off our own noses to despite our faces. Who and what has done this? In senseless acts of basically selling the American people downstream. While in the meantime, the 1%ers, the mega people, got stronger and bigger and more powerful. Because I guarantee you, you can go to, it don't matter to what retail store you want to go to in America, and probably over half, if not more, of their stuff in there is products that was not made and generated here in the U.S. From hammers to saws to clothing to cheap cosmetic jewelry to shoes to you name it. Why did that happen? I personally believe it goes back to what the American people didn't do that they should have done leading into the latter part of Ronald Reagan's administration that basically come back and haunted us. They done it. Our own people done it to themselves. And now the powerful and the rich, they're still sitting on easy street, basically, because they filled their pockets full, and they was smart enough to manage their money towards paying off this, paying off that, and have a bank account and over here and a bank account over there, and some of them's got 2 or 3 homes and vacation homes. They're still sitting on easy street while everybody else is struggling. In the meantime, we've had to deal with unforeseeable events like hurricanes, droughts, major flooding, storms, etc., etc. And in the meantime, whenever COVID hit, it basically knocked the wind completely out of our sail, even though we are considered to be one of the strongest economies in the world, or was up until COVID hit. China may be now, I don't know. India may be now, I don't know. But I'm just saying, there's been a calamity, and basically COVID is what has surfaced this calamity towards the American people now, going to the drawing board and realizing, my God, this thing has been on autopilot for this long a time, and we're just now realizing that we're heading into the storm instead of away from it. That's the reason why I like to use the analogy pertaining to everybody going down to the field. Let's say they was at a football game, and all of a sudden everybody rushes in to the playing field because they realize that if we don't get involved, we're going to basically become non-existing. Our team is going to completely fail. Our country is going to completely fail. And it may be a day late and a dollar short. Because looking at what's happening with the inflation, looking at what's happening pertaining to other countries, it's not abiding by the same set of rules, regardless whether it's EPA rules or whatever kind of rules. I mean, some of these countries are still working 12 and 13-year-old kids in these sweatshops, and that's the reason why they can produce off-brand Hanes underwear for as cheap as what they do and put it on boats and send it over here. Looking at that, and also looking at the irregularities coming from the forces of nature, it has no doubt put the American people in behind the eight ball. And until we have good leadership that can make a lot of this stuff disappear, including the $35 trillion debtness, we don't have a snowball chance in hell. And I hate to use that expression, but it's true. We don't have a snowball chance in hell in ever recuperating from this. To where if we was to abolish the $35 trillion, and maybe we need to do it across the board with all the superpowers, with all the countries, and start afresh. But if we don't do something on that level, we will not have a chance in ever recuperating from the damages that has already been done. In the meantime, the powerful and the rich, they're struggling a little bit, but they're still getting their proceeds. They're still becoming even richer. They're still becoming even that much more fatter. Their pockets are still getting full. In the meantime, the working class now are having to work twice as hard, pay twice as much taxes. That's basically breaking them down to the point that as we're seeing these exhausting things happening to the working class, we got a government that keeps raising the ceiling of, it used to be that you could retire at 60 or 62, then they raised it to 64, then they went up to 65 and 66, and if I'm not mistaken, some of these younger generation, the millennials and below, has to work until they're 70 years old before they get their full benefit pertaining to retiring. If that's not a calamity, and if that's not evil in the way that a country is dictating to its own people, I will kiss your tail and give you 30 minutes to draw up a crowd. Even Canada can see that. And they're a lot much smaller economy and a lot much smaller inflation-wise pertaining to the American government. So what has happened? I think it's got to do with what happened in 1988, whenever 9 tapes circulated to the White House, and Ronald Reagan convinced the superpowers in one way that the world wasn't going to be destroyed by a nuclear holocaust, but in another way wasn't willing to get in behind that ideal, wasn't willing to pursue biblical Bible prophecies, and because of it, it has put all of us in behind the 8 ball. Now, I've got a right to my opinion. they claim that everybody's got an opinion, just like everybody's got a you-know-what kind of hole. I've got a right to my opinion. And this is my opinion because I'm 63 years old and I've sat back and I've watched these things unfold right in front of my very eyes, just like it took me probably about 7 years before I finally figured out that the very people that I'd met over here in Martin, Tennessee in 1988 was in fact the very people that masterminded 9/11. And you may be saying, well, how did you put all those dots together, Dennis? Well, I put them together because after my wife decided to leave me the second time, Miss Jackson, in 2005, I started getting down and analyzing dates, names, numbers, places, people. And whenever I put together that on September the 11th was whenever we got married the second time, and on September the 11th was my wife's birthday, that was a direct attack upon to Dennis James Jackson, also known as Juby. Putting the pieces together in understanding that the American people had been bamboozled, that basically ended are related to the exchange of almost 3,000 people, or a little over 3,000 people that died the day of 9/11. Once you sit down and you analyze one's life and where one come from, me going all the way back to whenever I was just a young infant, being born in Antioch, Illinois, in St. Teresa's Hospital, understanding that at that point in time, I was targeted by this evil demonic spirit that wanted to take me out with a polycystic kidney infection. Then I went from that to electrocution almost to death. Then I went from that to falling out of a pickup truck going to a hayfield here in Tennessee. Then I went from that to having this done and all these other close encounters of death. You have to sit down, if you've come this close to death as many times as I have, and sit and start itemizing what is actually occurring here. Why is this occurring? And God, if you're saving my life, you're not saving my life, I don't believe, for me to go through more and more physical, worldly punishment, but you're obviously saving my life for a particular purpose. That's whenever the picture of the Antichrist come into the scene in 1983. But then after I studied and studied and studied the Bible more and more and more, in understanding, well, the individual that I heard about over here in Cydonia, Tennessee, and the Assembly of God Church, did not say that he was the actual Antichrist, but said that he was a follower of the Antichrist. It took me a great deal of pressure, prayer, and study to finally come up with what God was trying to show me pertaining to the physical, satanic Satan that was basically born the same way that Jesus Christ was born, through a supernatural entity, but using a female as the core of origin to do so. The only difference was God, that allowed for that to happen with Christ, it basically called this into play, was the entity of good. And now, 2,000 years plus later, evil pertaining to the Antichrist spirit, Lucifer himself, the Luciferian Lucifer, the family of evil, basically has done the same thing in creating an evil demonic person in the physical form towards having a head, body, 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 feet, and 2 hands. Now, the Wiccans can worship these people if they want to, or any other occultist group out there can worship the devil's people if they want to. But I'm telling you right now, the devil is out to kill, steal, and destroy. And if they want to sell their soul to the devil, that's up to them. That's totally up to them. But me, I'm going to stand on the side of righteousness. And I'm going to hopefully play a part in being on the front lines. Not only in the physical form, but also in the spiritual form. In making sure that true, godly justice is in fact pursued and performed regarding seeing the actual false prophet, the Antichrist, Lucifer, being thrown into a lake of tormented fire where they will burn and burn forever for bringing this type of harm and hurt and anguish to society. And if you, as a individual that wants to put a label on your coattail or on your plattail by saying, I am a born-again Christian and I believe in the teachings of the Lord Jesus Christ and I've accepted him as my Lord and Savior, if you do not have just as much hate against evil and the very entity of evil, then I question your relationship pertaining to you claiming one thing but doing something totally different. Now, you can call that narrow-mindedly if you want to. You can call that being somebody being prejudiced if you want to. You can call that basically somebody that isn't giving evil a fair play on the same level as good. But I've made a choice with the Lord Jesus Christ. I may not be able to fulfill all his requirements. I may not be able to walk on water and raise the dead and turn water into wine, but I'm not going to stop my pursuit in worshiping the Lord Jesus Christ and believing that I will be rewarded one day according to his teachings and his promises that he has given to humanity of those that will dedicate their lives to the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm not going to stop that, no matter what. I don't care how many times I get injured. I don't care how many times they want to throw me in jail. I don't care how many times that they want to put me in a psychiatric ward and have me studied. I don't care. Because I have made my mind up, as the scriptures teaches, those who endureth unto the end. And you may say the end of what? The end of the world? Well, the end of even your life. If you have come to the naught of your own personal life, that basically is the end of your world. But he who shall endureth unto the end, the Bible says, the same shall be saved. For our names is written in the Lamb's Book of Life, and we don't have to worry about that second death. What is that second death? That second death is whenever Lucifer will be released on the latter end of the 1,000-year millennium reign here on the planet Earth, according to the book of Revelations out of the King James Version Bible, and he will be loosed to go and deceive the nations once again into Gog and Magog, pertaining to the battle of Armageddon. Those that follow after this Antichrist Lucifer being one last final time, that will be their second death. They have made this choice upon to their own accord in the spirit world and not just the fleshly world. So that's whenever God will righteously judge all of us according to our works and according to our commitments that we have made down here, not only in this world, but also in the world to come.
We start tariffing those products, we will have inflation. To the extent that we want to produce those products in this country, we should start out on a very methodical path to do that. And I think we just saw the way that can be done pretty reasonably. The CHIPS Act, which was passed a year ago, was a piece of government legislation that says we will give chips manufacturers money to build foundries in the United States so we can build chips here. And then we can become self-sufficient on chip manufacturing. Then you know what we can do? Then we can tariff foreign chips from flooding our market at a discount price. But until we have the capacity to build them ourselves, putting a tariff on those chips would just be debilitating to our economy.
Right. It's more complicated, in other words, than what we're hearing on the campaign trail. Taxes are going to go up, as you've talked about on this program before, December 31st, 2025. The new president and the Congress are going to have to come to an agreement on this. You were the architect of those taxes.
And they're already taxing the working class to death. How much more of a load can the working class actually be taxed before they break the bank? I mean, because COVID has come into existence, it has basically offset people's retirement in unbelievable proportionable ways. You got people that thought that they had a nest egg built up, that now you got people at the age of 64, 65, maybe 67 years old, because they're still halfway decent in health, that's out here getting a secondary job. They may not be doing nothing no more or less than working as a greeter in Walmart or whatever, but you have people that's having to reassess their whole life, in addition to the people that was already hurting to the degree that they was having to make choices in the wintertime of whether or not we was going to get prescription drugs or whether or not we was going to be able to keep the lights on towards staying warm. That if the lights goes out, odds are we're going to freeze to death anyway, honey. Well, if we don't take our medication, we're going to die that way. Caught in between a damned if you do and damned if you don't scenario. That's what this American government has done. It has captured its own citizenship to the degree that now they are committing evil acts upon to their own people. While in the meantime, we'll allow for every Tom, Dick, and Harry to come over here, illegal immigrants, and basically offer them all kinds of benefits and all kinds of amenities, and basically giving them a green light towards saying, hey, the more the merrier, the more the merrier. I've never seen a government being run the way that it's run right now, in thinking that it can run inevitably till the cows come home. This is no longer a self-sustaining government whenever you're going in the hole $2 billion or $3 billion pertaining to compounded interest and $2 billion pertaining to our national defense. And that's in addition to all the other money. And that's a day. That is every day. If you can't figure this out, that we are on a road to doom and gloom pertaining to this great nation collapsing upon to itself, something is wrong with your arithmetic. And which maybe that's part of the reason why that even the Bush family talked about fuzzy math. Well, there ain't nothing going to be fuzzy about this whenever it winds up completely, totally collapsing upon to itself, because that is the direction and the projection that we're heading in. Now, you can fuzzy the math all you want in the meantime while the rich is getting richer, stuffing their pockets full, but eventually this is going to catch up with everybody, including the rich. And I've used this analogy, and I'll use it again, pertaining to whenever the system goes bad in America, it will be just like a gallon of milk. Whenever a gallon of milk spoils, it don't spoil on the top and the bottom still good. It don't spoil on the bottom and the top still good. It don't spoil on one side of the gallon of milk and the other side still be good. Whenever it spoils, it all spoils at one time. The whole gallon. Same way with our country. Whenever it fails on the East Coast, it's going to fail on the West Coast. Whenever it fails with the working class, it's going to fail with the rich class. Whenever it fails in the northern regions, it's going to fail in the southern regions. It's going to be just like that gallon of milk, using that gallon of milk as an analogy towards what's going to happen. Now, we thought that because we put limits on the stock exchange after the 1929 run for all the money, we thought that we were smart enough that we was going to avoid another total meltdown or a total collapse. We thought that we was. We thought that we had put things in place to where if the market started plummeting, that once it got so low, it basically shut the whole market down. We thought that we were smart enough to deviate from these things occurring. But what we wasn't smart enough in doing was looking at the big picture rather than looking at all the smaller pictures that was conglomerating into the big picture. It's kind of like a boat. I'm going to use this as an analogy. One hole in a boat, if you're in a small boat, 2 people in the boat, if you got one little hole in that boat, it's not that big of a deal to keep getting the water out of the boat or trying to patch that one hole, because it's only one hole. But if you're in that same boat and you got 1,000 holes in that boat, it's going to be difficult for anybody to maintain by getting all the water out of the boat before the boat basically gets swamped. And that's what's happened to the American economy. That's what's happened to the American government, pertaining to there's too many holes, too many corrupt people that has decided to dibble dabble around in a cookie jar, and now the cookie jar is fixing to be completely empty. And in the meantime, the American people, even those that does think that they got a nest egg, they're going to be left holding a bag. And I promise you, the bag will be empty. And they're going to wonder, my God, how come somebody didn't catch on to this? My God, how come somebody didn't see this coming? My God, how come we didn't try to prevent from these occurrences from happening to us? Well, people such as myself are trying to warn people such as yourself that way. But if you continue to keep avoiding us, if you continue to keep not paying any attention to us, then is whenever the fault changes from all of us to now the fault falls upon the feet of y'all that are warned. You was given these advisories of electrical disturbances to come, of a bloody road ahead, and you didn't pay close enough attention to those warnings and to those advisories. So in actuality, you'll have no one to blame but yourselves. At the end of the day, where the rubber meets the road, you'll have absolutely no one to blame other than yourselves.
That Donald Trump says he wants to extend. How do you expect Congress and the White House to work out where we're going to end up?
So taxes on the personal side change on December 31st, 2025.
Individual tax rate.
The individual tax rate. The corporate tax rate is permanent.
Although both campaigns want to change it.
Yeah, well, look, whenever you start down the path of doing tax legislation, everything's on the table.
Yeah.
You know, so I would assume that they will look at both corporate and individual tax rates. Taxes are very complicated. But as you've pointed out, to change the tax law, it's a legislative process in this country. You need the House and the Senate and the White House to agree. I think the composition of the House and the Senate are going to be very important to what final tax legislation looks like. And I do think there is growing opposition in both the House and the Senate, and I would say on both sides of the aisle, for a large deficit tax plan.
All of these plans being proposed by the Harris campaign and the Trump campaign come with tremendous price tags. What I think you just said is that Congress would not agree to sign off on any of them. Is that right?
Yes. What I'm saying is the tax plans as proposed right now spend a lot of money, don't bring in that much money.
Right.
So therefore, the net effect of that is we increase the United States deficit. I don't think there is a lot of appetite in the Congress to do that. We have grown our deficit quite substantially over the last 4 or 5 years. Some of that because of the pandemic, and that's when the government should be building a deficit. They should be building a deficit when there's a pandemic, because that is their central role, is to maintain the stability of the country. In better times, when we've got substantial economic growth, we should be trying to pay down that deficit to put ourselves in a better position. We're now in one of those better times, or at least not a bad time. And so I don't believe that Congress has a large appetite to pass a tax plan on either side that has a huge deficit component to it.
Gary Cohn, more to talk about with you, but we got to leave it there for today. Good to have you back. We'll be right back.
So, do these analyzers, do these projectors, do these people that's in control of our, basically not just our lives, but the lives of our children?
You're the vote. We turn.
Do they know what they're doing? Are we just going at this blindsided like we've been going at it for the past 25 or 30 years? I'm going to use the analogy of 30 plus years going back to what went on in the late 80s. Are we going to continue to be blindsided and to go at something basically in an unsubstantiating way of knowing the end results is still going to be the same, which is what? Total disaster.
He's a former civil rights attorney at the Department of Justice, who now leads the Center of Election Innovation and Research. He's also a CBS contributor on election law. And Chris Krebs, the former director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, now an expert and analyst here at CBS. Good to have you both. David, let me start with you. We saw this letter this past week from secretaries of state in all 50 states and District of Columbia issuing concern that we could see voters disenfranchised because of this increase in mail returned as undeliverable at higher than usual rates, even in cases where a voter is known not to have moved. And Donald Trump was tweeting about this morning. You can't trust the Postal Service. How much of a problem is this going to be for mail-in voting?
Well, it's a potential problem. I'm hearing this from state officials and local officials, of course, they're in the states. And we are seeing mail voting spread as an option around the country. I think we're likely to see less mail voting than we did in 2020 because hopefully we won't have a pandemic to deal with in 2024. But it's a significant problem. And it really stresses the importance of voters to make a plan when they're voting. Almost every voter in the United States has an option to vote early in person, 97% of all of them in every state except for Mississippi, Alabama, and New Hampshire. 36 states and D.C. do offer mail voting without an excuse, but if you're going to vote by mail, get your ballot early, request it early, make sure you get it, and then return it early. If you're going to return it by the mail, that's fine, just do it very early. There's also options for drop boxes and dropping it off at election offices and vote centers. That's going to be incredibly important for voters to self-educate about those options, just in case there are problems with the Postal Service.
And it's this coming week, right, where it's voter registration, voter awareness,
yeah.
What is it?
So this coming week on Tuesday is National Voter Registration Day. There's still plenty of time to register as we sit here today. There's 3 weeks left in every state. Some states go much longer than that, but no matter where you are, if you're an eligible voter, you can go to vote.gov. That's a great place to start. Taylor Swift mentioned it earlier this week.
I'm going to weigh in on what they're talking about a little bit. I don't know a whole lot about it, but I do know this, that I'm still getting mail in the name of Bobby Jackson. That's been dead now for basically 12 years. My dad. From A to Z, I get mail in his name. So whenever they talk about the post office service, it's not just necessarily the post office service. It's all these different entities that people used to deal with that they're still on their mailing list like they're still living to this day. So whenever it comes to dead people voting, I'm pretty sure that happens on a small scale, if not a large scale, because the American people are so vulnerable in this aspect, just like me getting mail in Bob Jackson's name, just like my dad was still living to this day. There's too many gaping holes in how that we have been handling ourselves for the past 30 plus years that has contributed to this problem whenever it comes to the authenticity of the vote. And how come somebody hadn't cleaned this up by now, especially since we're supposed to be on this so-called network called the internet? How come somebody hadn't already done cleaned this up by now? I don't know. I tend to wonder that it's being done intentionally. That way it can have verifications of it swaying just as easily one way as it does the other, depending upon what state that it may be in.
And it's a great place to start and get registered. Every eligible voter in the United States can still check their registration and get registered for at least 3 weeks.
Put it on your to-do list. Chris, I want to talk about some of the information environment issues that we are in. It is not every Face the Nation that we begin talking about rumors of cats and dogs and geese in Ohio. The reason we're doing it is because the Republican nominee on the debate stage repeated something that started as a Facebook rumor that got amplified that the senator from Ohio says resulted in calls to his office.
Now, once more, who do we have to blame for this? The internet, the computer. I think there was another incident that occurred with Hillary Clinton that some individual actually went somewhere and committed a heinous crime because of rumors. We have seen this occur again and again and again. And until the American people are smart enough to clean this up, we're going to have this ball and chain that we're basically having to walk around with that ain't doing nothing but basically dragging us all down. And that's exactly what it's doing. It's dragging us down. And you know what? People in North Korea, people in China, people in other parts of the world, as well as bad actors here in America, can see this, and they'll deliberately do things that will cause chaos pertaining to this election. And if our people in the White House can't identify that and then try to stop that, then once more, we have no one to blame other than ourselves.
You watch this kind of echo chamber and ecosystem of information. What do you make of a moment like this, and how frequently things like this get replicated now? Like, how does someone at home navigate truth when I went through fact check after fact check, the police chief, the mayor, the governor, and again and again and again, I was told, nope, you're wrong.
Yeah. I mean, the fact of the matter is social media, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, X, whatever, it's not the real world. It's not.
And be it as it may not. It may not be, but I want to use this as an illustration that only the locals around here are going to be able to relate to, providing that they're my age or older, is that there was at one time a lot of rumors in Martin, Tennessee, and this was before the event happened in 1988, pertaining to the meeting that I had with Satan and his disciples. But there was a rumor at one time that Tony's Pizza was actually going around killing cats, because people was losing their cats in Martin. The city of Martin was having all these complaints about people all of a sudden losing their animals. And the rumor got out that it was Tony's Pizza that was killing these animals and putting them on a pizza, putting them on their pizzas. I just got through having this discussion less than a week ago, believe it or not, over in Greenfield with a bunch of men. And they agreed that, yes, the rumor did exist, but they also agreed that during the time that Tony's Pizza was in Martin, Tennessee, where the grind is today, was some of the best pizza that you ever put in your mouth. Now, I don't know if it had anything to do with the cats. I don't know if it had anything to do with the flavoring that they was putting on the pizza. But whoever was making the pizza was doing a good job. Once more, it's amazing, and this was before the internet ever really come out and circulated the way that it did. This would have been somewhere probably in the early 80s is whenever this rumor come out about this restaurant. And you'll be surprised how many rumors that used to surface over a business, regardless whether it was a business doing body work that was putting out bad work, they couldn't match the paint, the lines didn't match, there were squeaks or whatever in the wreck, or people making meals that was bad or that was whatever. You'll be surprised how negative stuff basically exceeds anything good 7-1. My boss man in Jackson, Tennessee, used this as an illustration of 10 cars. He said we could do 10 cars and do them to the best of our capacity. And 7 of those cars could be absolutely perfect. We had made the paint match. Everything was absolutely right down to the manufacturer's specs in rebuilding that car back. But if there was 3 out of the 7 that the paint didn't match, the lines didn't line up, something was different about that. And this could go also with the paperwork not being able to properly process pertaining to the insurances and etc. That the 3 people with the bad work could do 7 times the amount of damage by getting out here and promoting, well, don't take your vehicle to that shop, because if you do, they ain't nothing but a butcher shop. They'll hurt you. They'll ruin you. It's amazing how bad news will travel and good news basically will stay fumigated into the area that it's in. In other words, those 7 people that got their car fixed perfectly, out of those 7, there may be 3 that actually gets out and brags to the rest of the public. Hey man, they do an excellent job. They do this, they do that. I had no complications whatsoever. But the rest of the 4 out of the 3 feels like, well, they've just done their job. That's just business as usual. They should have done my job the way that they done my job, and they should have scheduled it on time, in which they did. So I'm not going to get out here and brag about that business because they just done their job. But the other 3 that was dissatisfied, oh, they'll tear them up whenever it comes to getting out here and putting out a bad flavor in that particular business. How come is it that bad news travels, but good news really doesn't? Think it's got anything to do with the prince of this world? Think it's got anything to do with lies and corruption and deceitfulness? Think it's got anything to do with dishonesty and basically a bad energy entity that comes from the source of evil? Think it's got anything to do with that? I'll let you be the judge of that.
Reality. And so it provides an environment where specious claims like this can catch fire, but they tend to be constrained to that platform. What we saw on Tuesday was the firewall between mainstream and reality in this extremely online ecosystem break down, and they crossed over. And keep in mind that these social media platforms, well, Facebook has 1 billion plus users on a monthly basis. X has much, much fewer. And so what happened Tuesday night was the vast majority of people, there were 57 million, I think, viewers of the debate. The vast majority of them had never heard about this cats and dogs being barbecued in Springfield, Ohio. And I expected it because, unfortunately, David and I have to live in this world to anticipate what's coming. And so I had seen it going through social media for a couple days, and I fully expected it to jump into the conversation, go mainstream, and boom, there it is. So to your question, or to your point, how does one kind of, introduce some kind of personal resilience here? And it's exactly doing what you do. Go to mainstream outlets and trusted outlets and do a little bit of fact-checking verification. And listen to the public officials. Listen to Governor DeWine. Listen to the mayor and the city manager. Who's to know better than someone that's actually willing to put their face and their name to a claim rather than someone randomly on a social media platform?
And this will become increasingly relevant as we get to voting and going to voting facilities. Not Facebook rumors, the elected officials, the people who hold office. That's who we as journalists cite.
Yes.
And that's who people at home should look to.
Well, and to David's point about vote.gov and having a voting plan, yes, that is absolutely critical. But when you do come across rumors online of registration dates changing or voting locations or precincts closing, there are ways that you as an individual voter can go confirm, and that tends to go to the local election official or the Secretary of State. Trusted Info 2024, that's the campaign that the National Association of Secretaries of State and the National Association of State Election Directors have mounted now for 3 election cycles in a row. It's go to the authoritative source in your jurisdiction, which tends to be your Secretary of State, your state election director, or your local election officials.
David, in the last election, we saw some.
And I want to stop right there. That sounds good in theory. It really does. And it would work in a perfect world. Well, we know that we're not in a perfect world. And whenever you have these officials that's supposed to know what they're talking about, that obviously don't know what they're talking about, whenever they give out fake, false information, and I'm just going to use myself as an example pertaining to the Sandersons over here in Kenton, Tennessee, that one of their family members become a state representative for the state of Tennessee, found out about me and found out that I'd come back into this area, and because he had his own little private fan club in Kenton, Tennessee, the same town that my mother was raised up in, he put out ain't no tellings what about be on the alert from this individual that basically had this run-in with the Oklahoma authorities, basically painting me up as me being either a monster or somebody that was a lunatic or somebody that was basically out of touch with reality, because that was the same lies. I'm going to use the word lies, and I mean this literally, not figuratively. Whenever you have the lies that the Oklahoma authorities did not tell the whole truth to their own victims, much less their citizens, much less the world, pertaining to the Oklahoma bombing, this is the reason why people are skeptical. They're very skeptical today in putting a whole lot of faith in various authorities that's supposed to know what they're talking about before they ever talk about it. I mean, I even had the governor of the state of Tennessee during the time in 2009, whenever they put a bomb in the back end of my truck in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and exploded it and then put me all over national TV. I even had the governor of the state of Oklahoma put Dennis James Jackson, that was originally raised up in Northwest Tennessee, on a ban, a federal ban, to the point that I wasn't allowed to go into any federal facility for any reason at any given time. Well, you know, maybe I don't do a whole lot of federal business in federal courts or federal whatever, but if you really think about it, even our post office is considered federal, so that means that I couldn't even walk into a post office legally and write a letter or a package and send it to whoever I wanted to send it to. Whenever the people catch wind of stuff like this, just like the lies that went on during Ruby Ridge, just like the lies that went on during Mount Carmel, Waco, whenever the lies exist pertaining to now they're finding out the truth about 9/11, who actually plotted and planned and financed that event, you lose trust. You lose public trust. And because you lose public trust, it only adds to the pot. It stirs the pot even that much more towards people being that much more skeptical of various authority figures, regardless whether it's county, state, or federal. The people catch wind of this stuff and they start figuring out, my God, they're all lying. None of them's telling the truth. And that's the picture that the American government has painted for the past 30 plus years, ever since 9 tapes circulated to the White House during Ronald Reagan's administration. But the political parties and the so-called church corporate parties was not willing to back or to support. This is what happens. You create an environment of basically anarchy, chaos, a Wild Wild West show. And today our streets is more unsafer than what they've ever been. You can't trust people whenever they're dealing with you. I mean, you got to cross your T's, dot all your I's, take pictures of stuff, document stuff. Basically, you need to walk around with a recorder going 24/7, not knowing if somebody's going to put out a bunch of stuff about you and lie about you or whatever. Say that you're this way or that way, because you'll be surprised how much damage that you can do to an individual's life just by, let's say a couple is going through a bad divorce and the wife to that husband or whatever, could be vice versa, decides that she wants to get out here and gossip and tell everything about that individual in a negative type way. You'll be surprised how much influence that can have negatively upon to the other person, to the degree that not only will nobody want to be around that person or date that person, but it could affect their jobs, it could affect their credit rating, it can affect everything. Why? The good old American internet, the computer, that as far as I'm concerned has caused a hell of a whole lot more damage than it has good in the past 30 plus years. On every perspective that you can think of, on a global international perspective and also on a independent private perspective. Because it got to the point that it didn't matter if I was in East Tennessee, It didn't matter if I was in Tennessee. It didn't matter if I was in Colorado. It didn't matter if I was in California. It didn't matter if I was in Phoenix, Arizona. It didn't matter if I was in Oklahoma, any part of Oklahoma, state of Oklahoma. It didn't matter if I was in Florida or Atlanta, Georgia. I figured out, it didn't take me long to figure it out, that my life was over. You know why my life was over? Was because of this thing called the dragnet. That whenever the computer come on board, all of a sudden that dragnet went to being this big in this particular area to now it's everywhere. It's nationwide. You can't run from the dragnet anymore because the dragnet is being run through and by the internet. So it didn't matter if I was in Aspen, Colorado, trying to work in Basalt, Colorado, that I'd done already got hired, or if I was in Lodi, California, pretty close to Stockton, California, that I had a job in Stockton, California working. It didn't matter. Once people got on there and they got to tapping around and got to nosing around about Dennis Jackson, they found out all kinds of freaking lies about me that had been brought out about the Oklahoma incident and et cetera, and et cetera. They found out stuff that they thought was the truth that was only complicating my life even that much further. Actually, it went beyond complicating my life to the degree of destroying my life. Because, yeah, I might could have went out here and got a job, but it wouldn't have been from a reputable dealership, a reputable body shop. I would have had to work for somebody like a Backyard Julio chop shop type surrounding deal, to the point that you didn't get no benefits. You didn't know from one week to another whether or not somebody was going to try to rip you off and steal all your tools or not pay you properly or whatever. I could go down the list of how
In
people
Arizona, you speak to
how
election
people
officials,
can get burnt and hurt working for the wrong employer.
and are there areas of concern?
So I'm seeing tremendous strength from the election officials, despite the fact that they've been under pressure, stress, abuse, and harassment for 4 years now, that their work has continually withstood every bit of scrutiny that's been applied. And the fact that since 2020, every election they've run has been run very well and similarly withstood that scrutiny. But they're still exhausted. This disinformation environment Chris is talking about, that has real world impacts on our neighbors, on our fellow citizens who are working every day to give us all our voice. They are answering questions that are have no bearing to reality all the time about importing voters, about problems with the voting process, and they're having to navigate those while they're also still having to plan for an election that is likely going to be very high turnout, probably similar to 2020, perhaps even higher. People are very interested in this election, but they're ready. But one of the best things we can do is support them, is to support them by, as Chris suggests, listening to the actual information, going to the official sources for real information, getting information and making a plan in advance about how you're going to vote. And then finally, one of the things I always encourage, if you have any doubts or questions, volunteer to be a poll worker. You will learn so much about the process. You will find out how the process and why the process is so secure, how many redundancies and checks and balances and pieces of transparency are in place in that process. That will really help your election officials out, because then you become an evangelist for our very effective election system out in the community.
So, Chris, we are seeing more foreign efforts to meddle in this election. We expect in the coming days federal officials to file charges related to that Iranian hack and dump campaign that seems to have been foiled thus far, but attempt to hurt the Trump campaign. How much more of this is coming?
Well, my sense, and based on prior experience, particularly in 2020, where we saw the Iranians try to meddle in that election, the Russians, the Chinese, going back to 2016 with the Russians, is that they tend not to just have a single effort or work stream. There's an overarching strategy, a multifaceted, multi-pronged campaign that they've pulled together. We certainly know this with the Russians, that there are various work streams that they have launched against the U.S. The Iranians very likely have the same. So perhaps this is just the tip of the iceberg, and I've said that before. Not all of these activities, these work streams, will be successful or will break through, but the Hack and Leak campaign specific to Iran. But the main point in what I'm observing out of the United States government is that they are looking to keep constant pressure, consistent engagement against the Russians, against the Iranians, against the Chinese throughout the course of this election and afterwards. Remember, we have to run through the tape here, and that tape is inauguration.
Yep. And David, quickly, it is illegal for a non-citizen to vote in a federal election. In some localities, they can vote in municipal elections. Donald Trump is talking about this as a real concern.
Yeah, and it's not a real concern. And even Republican states that have looked into this have found incredibly small numbers of even potential non-citizens registered. We have found virtually zero non-citizens actually voting. Georgia did a full audit of its list and found zero non-citizens voting. That's because the protections in place are very effective. It's illegal to vote as a non-citizen. ID is required to register to vote. And if you're a non-citizen and you register and you vote, you will go to jail and you will be deported. So it's very important how effective those deterrence mechanisms are. This is not a problem. You'll hear that from Republican and Democratic election officials across the country.
Gentlemen, thank you both.
Thank you, Margaret.
We'll be talking a lot in the coming months. We'll be right back.
Now, what they don't tell you about is the fact that a lot of people today could care less about their federal laws. I mean, whenever you have people that's willing to take an automatic assault rifle and go out here and try to kill a president, or get out here and kill a bunch of school kids, or kill a bunch of people praying in a church, or do whatever that they do in a school, do you really think that people are frightened of that so-called federal mandated law? By and large, they're not. You know why? Because the people has lost faith pertaining to the public trust. And the more that the public continues to hear horror stories, such as my own, getting out to the general public, the more that they lose faith in the system. Especially whenever they look at the facts, proof being in the pudding, of us being $35+ trillion in debt, and all the other innuendos that has occurred or is occurring regarding our United States government. People have wisened up to what's occurring. Just like I said a while ago, me getting mail from various entities, insurance entities, even there was a thing that come through the mail pertaining to a survey on how many American citizens there are here in America, a census survey, that come in Bobby Jackson's name, and other mail that has come in his name. And you know, whenever I look at it, it really irritates me, because I'm thinking to myself, whenever I look at his name on these documents, I'm thinking to myself, this is one of the reasons why that we're cutting down the forest, and our global environment continues to keep getting worse and worse and worse, is because they keep wasting all this material on putting out all these bogus letters. So whenever somebody like Donald Trump talks about these things, he's not just talking to hear his head rattle. He's actually talking in response towards how that the system is basically corrupted from the inside out. And we have a clear illustration of that going back into the Gore and the Bush era, that I feel like that was one of the major number one bad moves that the American people made in the Hanging Chads down in Florida, that basically deciphered the differences of whether or not Al Gore, a Democrat, was going to be in power, or young Bush, the Republicans, going to be in power. And it was the Supreme Court that made that decision. And if I'm not mistaken, it was a very, very narrow margin of differences. And I'm talking about less than like 4,000 or something like that down in Florida. that made that determining factor of whether or not the Supreme Court was going to sway one way versus the other. Now, if we don't have a better way of making it foolproof other than taking the word of a bunch of people down in Florida that was actually destroying ballot boxes or deliberately getting in areas, making it that much harder for the voters to vote, knowing that it was a Republican neighborhood or a Republican community versus a Democrat predominant community, and these people would deliberately make things hard to where the people couldn't get to the voting ballot boxes quick enough, and now the vote was over, and they all had to go home, even though they were trying to get there, but they couldn't. If we don't have a better way of determining the fairness of an election than this, can you really blame somebody like Donald J. Trump in him questioning the authenticity of these events? And there's no doubt, I'm pretty sure that they have tightened the screws since the hanging chads, and especially since what went on this last election. I'm pretty sure that they've tightened the screws in different areas towards officials being more official in trying to make sure that they catch the loose ends. But there's still so many more loose ends that we don't really never discuss, or it don't never hit the main news about. So is it foolproof? No. Is it close to being foolproof? Not even. Will it ever be foolproof? Probably not. Can it become more better foolproof? Yes. If we all put our little noggins together and we all pull together towards trying to solve the breakdowns of this process that we go through pertaining to determining what official is going to be in power versus what official is not going to be in power. But we're all going to have to do it together. It's kind of like trying to solve the global environmental problem. It can't just be America leaning towards the EPA environmental laws and bylaws and us correcting the whole problem all over the world. It's going to have to take everybody pulling together at the same time in every country of resolving this problem regarding global warming. And if we don't, we're only as a dog chasing after its tail. We're moving, but we're not going nowhere. Now, people can ignore me all they want. They can ignore me all they want. And really and truly, I shouldn't be having to examine these things that are going on right now 30 plus years later, because I should have already been in heaven. The second coming of Christ has been delayed. All God's children should have already been taken out of these problems. But because of this resistance movement that began in the White House in 1988 during Ronald Reagan's administration, it has now put so many more problems on the table that now we have to look at and examine and try to figure out what the best solution to them are. So really and truly, the state and period of time that I'm in right now towards me examining this and examining that and making this video and making that video and trying to elaborate on what would be the best solution, regardless whether it was the forest fires in making houses more prone of not burning, or putting different fire blankets on various roofs to prevent the house from burning, or making sure that the house had a metal top versus a tar top, where it would be more prone of not catching a fire in case a cinder fire did wind up starting and it wound up blowing sparks over onto that particular house. I have tried to help again and again and again, including your snatch and grab with people going into these businesses using basically some sort of ink or maybe some sort of goo that you could like spray everybody in making sure that they was walking around all red or all green, that people would know something like that happened to them in this snatch and grab. I've tried to put my input in again and again towards bettering humanity versus trying to hurt humanity, but I'm still not getting support from any supporters. So it's as if I'm talking to myself. Even though I'm making these videos and I'm putting out these important messages, it's as if I'm just basically talking to a tree. Because I'm not getting no response back. Either locally or in any other form or fashion. So whenever people such as Al Gore and myself and other people continue to keep telling you again and again and again, this is what's going on, this is what's happening, and if we don't change, these are going to be the consequences of it, kind of like the scientists that went to the White House during Carter's administration and told Carter and the White House officials pertaining to global warming that if we did not change towards burning all these fossil fuels, this is what we could expect. And their response at the White House at that time, in the late 70s, early 80s, was get back with us whenever it starts to occur. Well, guess what? It's occurring. And guess what? It's not like a light switch of something that you can just flip on one day and flip off the next. We're talking about a trajectory that the world is on right now towards doom and gloom and self-destruction. Doom and gloom of self-destruction. And if we're not intelligent enough to analyze it properly and everybody come to the same conclusion, this is what's happening, this is why it's happening, and this must be what we have to do to prevent it from continually happening. If we can't all come to that conclusion of how to stop it, then the next conclusion is we're doomed. And that's the very reason why that I put out the statements that I put out, is that I do not believe that we could stop it. We could slow it down pertaining to the damages that's already been done and the damages that we're seeing on levels now undeniable, pertaining to the melting of the ice, pertaining to various forces of nature that are just completely off the wall in what normalization normally was. We might could slow it down, but we're not going to be able to stop it. The only way to be able to stop it is that you would have to stop all activity all over the world towards people going back and walking and riding horse and buggies. And you know good and well that ain't going to happen. That is not going to happen. And because that's not going to happen, the odds of us stopping this global international event, we won't be able to stop. We won't be able to stop it. And as the planet is warming up, there's so many other areas that it's affecting other than just storms or droughts or floods or whatever. There's the point of melting all the snow and ice. That's making it that much more easier for the planet to warm up that much more, because now you don't have that reflection barrier of reflecting that heat and that sun back up into the atmosphere. Now the planet is absorbing that heat to where before it was radiating it back out. Our oceans are steadily warming up. We're killing our reefs. We're destroying ourselves. And if we're all not willing to play by the same set of rules pertaining to global warming, we'll never resolve the problem. It's the same way with the election fraud. if we're all not willing to sit down and try to figure out what would be the best way of doing this, then we'll never have a solution to the problem, and there will always be gaping holes or cracks to the degree that whenever an election does occur, and it's a real close election, who actually won the election. And that's in addition to how we got the system set up over here pertaining to the popular vote versus the electoral vote. That just makes it that much more complicated. Because if I'm not mistaken, by popularity vote, Al Gore actually won that election of the Hanging Chads. But because he didn't win the right states in that election, the electoral vote exceeded the popularity vote, and that's what the Supreme Court went off of. And I truly believe that that was one of the biggest mistakes after the 1988 cornerstone that occurred with Ronald Reagan. I truly believe that leading up before 9/11, which was what, a year and 9 months before 9/11, I truly believe that that was one of the major steps that has put us where we are today pertaining to the election that happened during Bush Jr. getting strangled on a pretzel versus Al Gore, the Democrat Party, actually becoming president. Now, I got this to say pertaining to the election that happened during that time, is that really and truly the Democrat Party has no one to blame other than themselves, especially due to the lies that was promoted here in the state of Tennessee, that even their own Democrat Party did not hold up their own man in their own state because they was misguided by all the lies and the propaganda that they had stirred up pertaining to how that if the Democrats come in power, that it was a bunch of owl lovers and a bunch of tree huggers, EPA lovers that was going to cause this kind of damage. And if the Democrat Party got in power, that Al Gore was going to make sure that he went house to house in the state of Tennessee, taking everybody's firearms from them. Once they projected that lie, and don't think for a second that this isn't the first time that those tactics hadn't been used, because we can go all the way back into Davy Crockett era, that basically Davy Crockett nailed it on the head by saying it was Andrew Jackson that promoted all these lies that costed him that next election. And we can look at other elections of other politicians that's been fumigated in the same way. So whenever Donald J. Trump talks about these things, he's not just talking to hear his head rattle. Botching up these elections goes on all over the world, depending upon the time frame, the culture, and what's happening. So whenever it comes to the authenticity of these elections, plus whenever it comes to discovering all these innuendos that the government has been lying about or not telling the whole truth about in various situations, it just leads to that much more public trust being violated, and it leads to that much more chaos and anarchy being created by the devil himself. Like I told you a while ago, using the scenario of 10 customers, 7 of them being perfect, 3 of them being dissatisfied, those 3 individuals can do 3 times more damage than what the other 7 could ever do towards holding up a business and promoting it as it being a good business. Those 3 that was dissatisfied can do more damage than the other 7. And you may be saying, well, why is that? Well, it's because 4 out of the 7 that did get a good job basically looked at it as it being, business as usual. They done what they were supposed to have done. So they ain't going to get out here and they're not going to speak any type of good things about that business. They're not going to promote them in a good light. I mean, I'm pretty sure if somebody was to come up to them and ask them, hey, what do you think about this particular business over here? I'm pretty sure that they're not going to intentionally lie about that business. But as far as them actually being a advertisement, I'm going to use the word agency because I really don't know what else to use. As far as them being a good advertisement agency in advertising for that business, of it being a great business, they're not going to do it. 3 of them might. But the other 3 on the other side that was dissatisfied, you can guarantee that they're going to get out here and they're going to bash that business every and any way that they can. Because they was dissatisfied either in the quality or the time, or something went haywire with the paperwork or something. You can count on it that the 3 in a negative light would do more damage than the 7 could ever think about in a good light. Why is that? Let's go back to the Bible. The Bible says that mankind loves darkness rather than them loving light. In other words, humanity rather wallow around in their own manifestations of inadequacies than they would to pull up their bootstraps and do the proper and right thing. It all leads to the influence of the spirit world, of how the evil spirit world, not only in this great nation, but throughout other countries, have become so predominantly influential, especially since the internet come on board, since social media, the computer. It's basically drawing down society, that even Elon Musk and the founder of Facebook and other social media major platform people, designers, has said this is basically going to be the end to humanity. And you know what? I tend to wonder if they're not telling the truth, especially if we're not capable of understanding what we're doing to ourselves and being able to modify, put guardrails in the sense of these things not occurring. Now, don't ask me how that I can make it more foolproof. That's almost like saying it's going to be perfect. I personally don't believe that anything upon this world in any or all directions can never be completely perfect. That was probably one of the reasons why that even Jesus, whenever they were trying to idolize Jesus and saying, oh, good master, good master, good master, trying to put Jesus on a pedestal, said, ho, wait a minute. There's only one that's good. And that's the Father, pertaining to the spirit world. Because just about any and everything down here on the planet Earth, I don't care if it's a tree, I don't care if it's a fish, I don't care if it's a human, I don't care if it's a bird, has been affected and contaminated in some form or fashion in a sinful, negative, dark way. Now you wonder, how come I got all this animosity against my enemy that's out to kill, steal, and destroy? It's not just the problems that has developed in my personal life since 1983, whenever them 2 hands miraculously come out of nowhere that spared my life, that basically I've seen metal bending around my body that is scientifically impossible, and I lost 9 units of blood in less than 45 minutes that I should have died over. But it's all the other problems, it's all the other harm, it's all the other darkness that has befallen upon to not just the American people, but the world in general. Whenever Dick Cheney and Bush went to war pertaining to Saddam Hussein either in Desert Storm or Desert Shield, or possibly both. One of their primary objectives was to eradicate the axis of evil. Well, they were saying that metaphorically, because deep down inside, they really don't want to eradicate the devil, because hey, we've been making money off of the devil. That's been what's feeding us and feeding our courtrooms and seeing probation officers and sheriff's department and etc. We don't want to eradicate evil, because evil has been what's been feeding us. But at the same time, the humans down here has been playing both sides against the middle in saying that they support the likeness of good pertaining to the teachings of Jesus Christ, but in reality they hadn't been wanting to live by them. So the mortals down here has been playing or burning both candles on both ends pertaining to evil and good, and now it's caught up with them to the degree of what we're dealing with all over the planet. And until we're willing to awaken to these things, and until we're willing to act upon to these things, we're going to consistently, consecutively go backwards as far as taking one step forward and 2 steps back. One step forward and 2 steps back as far as a civilized society becoming even more civilized. Because you don't have to be a brain surgeon to figure out, instead of us becoming more civilized, we're actually becoming more uncivilized. Looking at the masses, looking at the whole. And until we're willing to open our eyes and act upon that in which what we're seeing and what we've discovered, we're only going to continue to go backwards versus going forwards. I pray to God that that not be the case. I pray to God that this next election will be an election to be bragged about, pertaining to the authenticity towards it being real and fair and true and open and honest. But I'm just afraid, because of the works of the devil and so much negativity, so much propaganda that has went out, just like the damages that has been done with the character assassination that's been played upon my particular part, going all the way back to 1983 in Kenton, Tennessee. And I'm not saying that I've been perfect, and I'm not saying that I've always walked the totem line pertaining to being Christ-like, because I've failed. I have failed in areas that I should have been standing true for righteousness. I have failed whenever it comes to basically backsliding. I'm going to use that word, backsliding in the eyes of the Lord, and not really truly trying to be or live out the righteous life that I should have been living. I have failed in not being able to raise the dead. I have failed in not being able to walk on water. I have failed in not being able to turn water into wine. But just because I have failed in some of these areas does not mean I'm going to throw up my hands and say, you know what, I'm just going to sell my soul to the devil, and the hell with God, and the hell with the Lord Jesus Christ, and the hell with the Holy Spirit. Because by me doing that, I would basically be saying the hell with myself. And I'm not going to say the hell with myself, even as Job in the Bible was tempted by his own wife after he had lost everything. And this man was a predominant wealthy individual that had all kinds of livestock, all kinds of friends, all kinds of people that supported him. And now he's at his end of his rope. And he's now lost everything that he had. All his friends has abandoned him. He's even lost his health to the degree that great sores was coming up into his body. And his wife looked at him and said, Job, why don't you curse God and die? And Job looked at that woman and said, though worms may devour my body, I will not curse my God that way, woman. In other words, he was saying, Satan, get thence behind me. I rebuke you in the name of God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And I truly believe that that was Job's turning point. Because up until that point, the devil was trying to break Job. He was trying to basically cause Job to turn against the righteous, holy, eternal God. And basically it turned into a contest. If you read the Bible, you'll see where basically it turned into a contest where the devil was actually talking to God and explaining to God, well, I can't do this because you've got this protected hedge around Job, and because you got this protected hedge around him, I can't break him down. I can't get him to turn on you. And once it reached that point with God, God said, okay, I see what you're saying, devil. I tell you what, you can do anything you want to him. And I got faith in Job that he's going to stay strong and long with me. And he's not going to be a traitor. And you can do any and everything to him that you want other than taking his life. And boy, did that contest ever begin. And Job got all the way down to the point of his own wife looking at him and say, why don't you curse God and die? And that's basically what the devil wants all of us to do. He wants us to throw in the towel because we haven't walked on water, because we haven't risen the dead, and we haven't turned water into wine, and we know that we do have imperfections in our lives. He wants us basically to throw in the towel, curse God, and die. Because that's basically what the Luciferian Lucifer done whenever it decided to challenge the Holy Father in the Holy Kingdom. That started war, and that's whenever the good angels had to kick the bad spirits out. Now this trial and error is still going on today. Probably more so today than what it ever has regarding this spiritual warfare, that I didn't have no idea that this was going to occur until I actually started experiencing it after 1983, whenever I had a group of individuals that was dead set over in Kenton, Tennessee, that I went to as an entity of good, thinking that they was going to be able to help me, basically putting out the SOS, please help me, please help me. I've had this occurrence that's happened in my life. What can I do about it? And rather than them responding positively in Kenton, Tennessee with Damian Cross and Don Curry, they actually went just the opposite direction. From then on, we're going to stain this individual. We're going to assassinate this individual's character. And we're going to do everything we can do in the eyes of the public to make this individual look as small as we can, as stupid as we can. We're going to make this individual out to be a lunatic if we can. And once they identified after 20 years that it went by that they couldn't do that, because I did have a smart enough ability about myself in understanding what was going on, that's whenever they changed their concept right here in Weakley County, Tennessee, right up here in Dresden, Tennessee, beginning in Martin, Tennessee, with David Moore, the ex-chief that used to be the chief of police over here in Martin. That's whenever they changed their whole concept to the degree that we was no longer going to try to prove this individual of being insane or a lunatic in the eyes of society, but now we're going to try to make this individual out to be a homegrown terrorist. On a state level, on a county level. This was in 2005. I had already been beat up on a federal level, coming from Homeland Security, Secret Service, towards what that they had done to me in 1989 in Jackson, Tennessee, and as well as 1991 in Wheeling, West Virginia, towards actually trying to brand me as me being a entity against the American people by saying that I was on my way to Washington, D.C. to take out George Walker H. Bush's life during the events of Desert Storm and Desert Shield. Now, friends, that's where the core of origin began, in the American people going left instead of going right. And it started building from that moment on. Let's just completely forget about the things that was going on in my life at that particular time. But that's whenever the American people started going backwards. That's whenever we had Ruby Ridge. That's whenever there was other 2 or 3 events that happened, as well as the event that happened in Waco, Texas, as well as the event that happened in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Now, in 1993, there was also another event that happened where the American government basically let its guard down towards the Twin Towers being attacked during that time. We also had other attacks upon to our naval vessels in the sea towards terrorist attacks. But that's whenever the American people, by and large, started going to the left versus the right. And of course, it all led into 9/11 and picking up the dots, picking up all the pieces, going into my particular life in 205, right here in Martin, Tennessee, basically costed me a farm, a mini farm, costed me my wife, costed me my job that I had working in Huntington, Tennessee for Classic Collision, Jimmy Lloyd and Jimmy Darnell and David Lloyd. And it also costed me X amount of dollars pertaining to fines and bonds, lawyers' fees, had to declare bankruptcy, and basically had to move plumb out of the area because of how that these individuals were trying to destroy me here in my own Weakley County territory. The very territory that even my own great-grandfather worked for temporarily as far as doing legal work for the state in the early 1900s. Now, all that was going on in my brother's mind and in my brother's heart of knowing how that society had turned against him simply because his brother had come back home to roost with the rest of the chickens, in which his brother had all the rights of doing so. A matter of fact, his brother actually didn't have to come back to this area to rest with the chickens, because he could have went elsewhere and still told his story and still got either some sort of approval or at least allowed for people to know who I was pertaining to my story of the people that had wronged me here in my own county, in my own state. But rather than me doing that, I decided, you know what? I'm going to grin and bear it, and I'm going to take it. And boy, did we ever take it. And we took it, and we took it, and we took it to the degree that my younger brother couldn't take it no more. That basically put him in an early grave at the age of 51. Now, all these people that was part of that process in this rebellion, they'll either ignore it if you ask them, or they'll lie to you. Oh, that's Juby's imagination. Juby's imagining these things about what went on in Kenton, Tennessee with Damian Cross and Don Curry. Juby's imagination is running wild pertaining to being attacked again and again and again, and all these other problems that went along with it pertaining to the events that's now documented on paper, either medically or legally in the courts. But yet and all, they continue to keep telling the lies, feeding the propaganda to the public, character assassination, while the public continues to go down this endless, sad, destructionable road. Let's listen to this one other article here on TV that I've caught a little bit of a glimpse of, and then after that, I got things to have to do because it's finally quit raining and the sun is shining, which thank God that we got the rains that we got. I was told last night, I was in Dyersburg by a farmer, that we got as much as 5 inches of rain, that it come in such of a blessing type way because it didn't come all at once. It come intermittently. That was a beneficial rain, a slow rain that our forest and our rivers and our fish and basically our aqueduct systems underneath our feet got a great deal of beneficial out of. In other words, it was good for this particular area, planetarian wise. It was a blessed rain. It was a very, very blessed rain that this particular area really, really needed. I don't know how dry it is up in Idaho, or I don't know what's going on in Denver, Colorado, pertaining to the beetles and killing all the trees and etc. I don't know if that's still going on or not, but I can only verify to what's happening right here around me right now. Let's listen to this particular article, please.
Springfield, Ohio, reaching a new peak today as baseless conspiracy theories, lies, have put the local Haitian community at risk. Hospitals and schools have gone on lockdown, and one local university canceled all activities today after it received a shooting threat. Meanwhile, former President Trump and Ohio Senator J.D. Vance have so far refused to take back their remarks.
Do you denounce the bomb threats in Springfield, Ohio?
I don't know what happened with the bomb threats. I know that it's been taken over by illegal migrants, and that's a terrible thing that happened.
I have heard firsthand from multiple constituents, people who made 911 calls a month ago, a year ago, who were making these complaints. I trust my constituents more than I do the American media.
So curious how Trump always pleads ignorance to things. But let's go to Maggie Vespa, who's joining me now from Springfield, Ohio. So Maggie, welcome. These threats, the danger towards the Haitian community there seems to be getting more serious. What are you hearing?
Yeah, first and foremost, we should fact check the former president. These are not illegal Haitian immigrants. They are legally in the city of Springfield, Ohio, and city officials have stressed that multiple times. But what we're hearing is that the threats seem to be getting more serious, or at least also coming in different forms. Wittenberg University was the Springfield college that you're talking about. They canceled all in-person activities on campus today after last night saying that they got a threat via email of a possible campus shooting, and the person who sent that threat, they said they planned to target Haitians on campus. So again, that campus effectively shut down for the time being. At the same time, for the last 3 to 4 days, we've seen bomb threats closing everything from multiple elementary schools, middle schools, hospitals, government buildings, the local police and the FBI all investigating those threats. But I mean, this has been enough. Just this fear and this isolation and just this, how it's reached a fever pitch nationally, has been enough to force the Haitian community kind of somewhat into hiding. They had initially planned, before all the threats began, to have an in-person meeting at their Haitian Community Center last night at 5 p.m. We got there about a half hour beforehand, and they said, actually, we decided to cancel it because of safety concerns, and they told us they were moving it on to Facebook Live. I said, what are the safety concerns? What are the threats you're hearing? They said, we're getting threatening phone calls. They said people are accosting Haitians on the street. Some parents are keeping their kids home from school, and in particular, one man told me this story. Take a listen.
I was talking to my friend like recently and said one of the Haitian guy got punched on his eye.
A Haitian person was punched in the face here in Springfield.
Yes.
How does that sit with, like, how do you deal with that?
Actually, that's why we're here. We're trying to help with all these kind of things. It's really, really, really bad here.
I'm going to comment on this, if you don't mind. I'm going to weigh in. I didn't realize that this was what was going on, the intensity of it, until just now. You seen me flipping through the channels, and there was no way for me to be able to know what we were fixing to observe until we all observed it at the same time. So I'm going to comment on it. First of all, I know some really, really decent Haitian people. I know some really, really good Philippine people. One of them actually conducts a church over here in Humboldt that I know that is as good as gold, that would be willing to do anything in the world for you. I know some very, very good Mexican people, foreigner people, that would go out of their way to help an American more so than hurt an American. So whenever it comes to this stereotyping against the foreigners, for whatever reason, is all a bunch of BS, and it's all created from gossip. I don't know if somebody has killed a dog and ate it over in that particular area, no more than I know what went on in Martin, Tennessee, pertaining to Tony's Pizza, pertaining to all the cats. I can only tell you and express to you what was heard, what was told during the time that it was told. I can only tell you that their business in Tony's Pizza was a booming business because they could make one Whopper of a freaking pizza. I'm pretty sure, or at least I would like to be convinced of believing this, that it was based upon the cook and the quality of their mixtures of what they used in their recipes in making a good pizza. May have been the oven, I don't know. May have been just all of it combined. But this is what you get whenever gossip starts. And I'm going to reflect back to my life again real quick. Of the fish story that started out, well, he caught a 4-inch fish. And then it goes to word of mouth to the next person. Well, it was a 6-inch fish. Then it goes to the next person. Oh, no. It was a 10-inch fish. He caught a heck of a whopper. He caught a good fish. And then the story gets told to another person. And the next thing you know, this person done caught a whale. They actually have a word in the dictionary, terminology for all this stuff that went on in not only my life, but is going on in other people's lives that once more the internet enhances. Social media enhances these things. And it doesn't matter if it's a couple going through a divorce and she decides to want to get out here and destroy that individual character by telling all kinds of stuff that who knows whether or not it's real or whether or not it's so or it ain't so. But this is what we have to blame on the good old American internet. Social media that is only enhancing these things rather than cultivating them and putting the fire out. It's actually getting bigger. And to me, it's only a fulfillment of Bible prophecy, for Christ said that there would be commotions in the last days, that there would be uprisings, that there would be disturbances all over the world, including wars and rumors of wars, that all these sorrows, the Bible declares them as them being bad sorrows, will invade humanity, the inhabitants here upon to the planet, as in being one of the woes. We're in that woe. As we're seeing society become a sicker society, pertaining to people's health, and as we're seeing all these commotions, all these disturbances, civil disturbances happening all over the planet, we're seeing biblical Bible prophecy being fulfilled. Which leads to the next $64,000 question. Are we smart enough to identify what is occurring, why it's occurring, the source that it's coming from, the dark source, which is out to kill, steal, and destroy, the source that according to the Bible, is the author of confusion, and are we smart enough to act upon these things towards putting these fires out and basically going up against the forces of evil in resolving these issues, or basically eradicating the very axis of evil. So you wonder how come that I have such of a bitter taste whenever it comes to evil. Lucifer himself these demonic forces, it's not just on behalf of my own personal behalf as far as being attacked and my family being attacked, but it's the world in general. I'm sitting back and I'm seeing all this stuff, folks. I'm seeing this stuff open up right in front of my very eyes, but at the same time, I'm still seeing my messages basically being ignored, or the seriousness of my messages being ignored. So I tend to wonder, I keep asking the question, maybe we have gone over the Rubicon of the point of no return. Maybe it is going to take a major civil disturbance like a civil war or something that's going to break out if we don't get a hold of these things. Our national security interest right now is at a breaking point. And if we're not smart enough to see this, then the only other thing that I got to say is may God have mercy on our souls.
Speaking of time.
And so once again, that in-person meeting was canceled last night, and the people at the community center, perhaps no surprise, telling us they have no plans to reschedule it at this point. We have also heard, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, Alex, about the fear kind of spreading even to other states as far south as Florida. Lawmakers there say Haitians in that state are reaching out to them, saying they're seeing this story bubbling up. They're terrified. But even just here in Ohio, about a half hour southwest of Springfield, the chief of Dayton police putting out a statement basically saying, he said, we stand by our immigrant community, and there is no evidence to even remotely suggest that any group, including our immigrant community, is engaging in the crux of this rumor, which again, Donald Trump and his running mate have alleged they are eating pets, with officials have said there is no evidence of that. Alex?
Yeah, I'm just shaking my head. I don't have anything to say in response other than thank you, my friend. Appreciate it, Maggie.
It's basically cannibalism, or it's leading up to cannibalism. And the next thing you know, that'll be another lie that'll be talked about, that these people are killing people and actually frying them up like Hannibal, that Donald Trump has talked about, and eating them for breakfast, or eating various organs out of their body, such as their brains, for breakfast. Once more, we as a civilized society, as a Christian society, needs to sit down, calm down, be level-headed about all this, and identifying who and what is doing this and why they're doing this. Because if we continue on this same cycle that we're on, we're basically on a cycle of total annihilation. And that, my friends, would be the very thing that Lucifer would love to see happen to humanity. That way he could shake his head, shake his fist in the face of God while beating his chest by saying, look what I have done. I have brought humanity to its knees. Look what I have done. And that is the very thing that this evil entity wants to do, because that's the very thing that it done to itself. It brought itself to fear and trembling in the name of Jesus. It has no one else to blame. That even Christ, while he was walking and talking amongst us, said that evil was evil, that it was a liar and a murderer from the beginning. In other words, it was a degenerate, abnormal problem that obviously began in its infancy before it ever become a mature spirit up in heaven, that it was a evil entity that Jesus said from the beginning, indicating that there was a problem with Lucifer in the beginning that started this war in heaven that even to this day is still going on. And now we're fighting the same elements down here, and all the rumor all the gossip, all the hype towards destruction. And I just pray to God that that not be the case. I want to pray for our great nation. Dear Lord Jesus Christ of Nazareth, Father, eternal God, I know, Lord, that I have made mistakes in the past. And I know, Lord, that I'm not perfect. And that I still have to overcome the challenges of the flesh even to this day, that some battles I win, some battles I don't. But you have given me the desire to want to stick closer to you than ever before, in not cursing you, but wanting to stick closer to you. And even though the closer that I stick to you, the more I either get examined by humanity, or the more that I get these demonic spiritual warfare tactics taken out on towards me, I will continue to serve you and to bless you in every way that I know possible. I pray, Lord, that you will forgive me of my trespasses, even as I forgive others that trespass against me. But I pray, O Lord, for my brothers and sisters in Christ. I pray, Lord, for this great nation. I pray, Lord, for the leadership of this great nation. And I just pray, God, that you will engulf us with the desire of wanting to serve you more and more regarding a true spiritual revival that will revolutionize not only this great nation, but this world in a sensible way that you intended for it to be, towards the meek inheriting the earth. Not the so-called meek, not the artificial meek, not the disguised meek, are those that are imposters that want to present themselves as being meek, but the true meek, your word, which is a prophecy in and of itself, shall inherit the earth before the second coming of the Lord Jesus Christ. I just pray, God, that you, Lord, will put this indelible spirit into all of us to want to be closer to you, to want to serve you, to want to be in likeness of you each and every day, not just in America, but throughout the planet. I pray, Lord, these things in your Son's name. In Jesus Christ's name, I pray all these things in the glory and the honor of you and your Son Jesus and the precious Holy Spirit, in where America goes from this moment on, and the world in general goes from this moment on, as we're seeing these mortals torn apart each and every day. In Jesus' name, and amen. Thanks again for listening. Good luck to each and every one of us. I want to say God bless America, God bless our troops, and God bless our endeavors towards where we go from this moment on, because I can see, physically, tangibly see, where the tentacles of Satan continues to keep bringing that many more good people down the tubes. God bless. Heaven help us all. And shalom.